in particular, I work with ideas of community, culture, and then making. So I'm basically a researcher and a maker, and what I'm going to show you is really some forays into making as a kind of bridge to all of these things. So a main focus for me is learning from ecology, ecological indicators as drivers for design choice is the way that I frame that. And this is really sort of how I pitch that in a kind of nested way, is that ecology absorbs everything, culture, human society and place within that. And then what can we do? What do we make? What are the tools that we can use to interface both with culture and ecology? Some of those things could be very simple, or some of them could be computer vision and AI, and I don't really mind. If it's low tech or high tech, it's all a design choice in that sense. So I'm just going to throw these places up for you, and I know that there's been quite a lot of interest from Taiwan, and I have a very strong love for Taiwan and Taipei. And what you're seeing there on the left side is these urban gardens in Taipei, which sit above a fab lab. And this is a recurring theme for me, is rural fab labs. What you see in the middle is Vaidauda Self-Sufficient Labs, the campus just outside of Barcelona. And then on the right is where I live and work, which is in the south of Catalonia. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those two places on the right, Catalan style, but there are other places as well which are of interest. So this is pretty much what I'm going to try and do in 15 minutes, is those two places, and I'm going to look at the projects which go through them. I'll jump back and forth a little bit between these things. So Vaidauda Labs, again, some of the folks here will know Vaidauda very well, but the context in which it works has a relationship to the urbanism of Barcelona. The idea of having a network of fab labs within a city, with every neighborhood having the ability to make and make locally, is essentially this idea of Ateneus, or let's say people's factories, public, open, making spaces. Doesn't have to be a fab lab, it can just be a making library. And the one at the top there, you see the green fab lab, is where I began to work around 15 years ago, I think now. So it was in the context of a fab lab, a fabrication laboratory that I was working there. And so it's quite an interesting place. It's a large area of the Collserola Park. It's around 130 hectares. But it's also, I'm borrowing this concept from permaculture and ideas of agroecology, of the intersection. It's an edge place. So it's on the kind of border of the urban and rural, of the Mediterranean environment, the land to the sea, but also it's a kind of collision zone of the past and the future as well. So IAC, as the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia, is very experimental. Some things work, some things don't, but everything is prototyped. So this is a real place for experimentation, prototyping, failing and trying, I would say. And so here you can see this wide area of Vaidauda, and it's actually quite an interesting archaeological site as well, with a restaurant on there and a research center. A lot of forest. That's the prime habitant of this area is the forest and the trees. So what you're seeing here is Vaidauda Labs, the Masía at the top, and we are looking at Vaidauda there from a food forest plantation. And what you're seeing at the bottom is the lab, the green fab lab, which is inside the Masía. So this is laser cutters, CNC machines, 3D printers, electronics, computation, mushrooms, bees, and plants, fish, and trying to basically work with those things. So when I came to Vaidauda, I was essentially tasked with setting up labs, setting up infrastructure to be able to investigate research. And for me, those things started with the forest itself, looking at how we can cultivate and plant, so gardens, setting up biology equipment, microscopes, PCRs, trying to make then things like microscopes and PCRs. So we began with the Fab Academy, the Bio Academy, as well as looking at architecture and really trying to learn within these investigative environments. So conceptually, this is quite an interesting place to experiment, but really that's hugely broad. If we're looking at microbes in the soil, and we're also looking at robotics or materials, what are we doing here? So not being afraid of looking at different sciences and arts and borrowing from them all. So I'm putting this as a consilient laboratory and investigation. So that's a term by E.O. Wilson, which is the jumping together. You can't have physics without biology, without microbes, without human health and art. So all of these things together in a consilient form. Just open questions. I want to go back even further. So this is the 1600s of Cistercian monks living on the land. And they were the original producers and consumers within that place, and also interested in self-sufficiency, architecture, agriculture, hydrology. What can we learn from them, or the patterns of their work? And again, this is a map of the Cistercian monasteries of Europe, indeed around the world, and they would share knowledge, encourage agricultural practices, and really they had a kind of green revolution of the time by sharing their knowledge. Jumping forward, there's a network of Fab Labs, and you can actually see that there's a kind of overlay similarity there. So even if we're digital, we're computational, we share our knowledge with open source licenses, well, we're still not the first ones to be doing that. So we can still learn from the past in these ways. And this in a sense is really what the concept of what I'm trying to work with is, how do we learn from traditional situated knowledge of place, and then just give it a bit of an update with modern tools. So as I go forward, I'll just try and capture some of those projects in that frame of learning from the past and using new tools. This is a vision of the Vaidauda Gardens. So just in front of the Masía there's many plots that we have a rotation. So there's actually a 6, potentially 7 stage rotation of crops that's now been going on for around a decade. And all of that is to try and encourage the health of the soil. The water for all of that comes from the forest, comes from those key lines and horizontal lines that we see on the landscape. So within those gardens, that's a lot of manual labor. That is a lot of hands getting very dirty, and a lot of encouraging students to get up in the morning and go outside. So this is a very, very active garden that's had hundreds of hands working on it. And really the context of this is, how do you transfer that knowledge from one year to the next? And how do we also explore within that framework to look at different types of crops and use also the forest? So this is a garden laboratory and also a way to think and experiment with the students. What you're seeing at the top are these berries, which we find all over the forest, but we don't see them in our food system because they're very, very difficult to harvest on time. So they're basically left behind. These are called Arbutus unido, or in English, these are from the strawberry tree. But they are absolutely wonderfully tasty, but only when they are perfectly ripe at the right time. So what does that mean? That's a challenge for us then. It's how could we invent tools or methods or ways to involve other types of crops and not just the ones that we can control. This is a photo below, a bit of an old one, of the Agri Lab. So we have a kind of fab lab dedicated particularly to agriculture. And you can see a bit of a robot there being built to the right, and some very messy bee work as well, which I'll come back to. So part of the job there is planning what to plant where and what to plant with what in terms of companion species. And so plotting all of this out, as architects like to do. And then also at the bottom, using some imagery to be able to measure and get some analytics from that. Just another version of that there. And so coming from this, and I don't want to get too focused on the computation or the how, but I do want to look at what might be possible given those things. So at the top, what you're seeing is a parametric design of planting cabbages and lettuces together. And so it's a car park problem. How many cabbages can you fit in a garden bed, and how many lettuces can you grow around them whilst they grow? So we figured out that you could have 3 crops of lettuce whilst the cabbages are growing. But that's very dense and very difficult to plant and manage. Yet in the space and the time, it becomes possible. So rather than planting in rows, we're offsetting both of those crops together. Also, there's some other sort of 3-dimensional planting as well. So what you're seeing here on the bottom right is beans at the back and some of the lower crops at the front. And so we can start to look at a kind of topography of planting as well. So not just in 2D. And this is where I think we can all agree that, let's say, food forestry or a food forest is very, very interesting. So what would that be if we could plant many, many different layers of crops together? So that's farming in 3D with trees in a permanent agriculture. And this is a pretty good section of what that might look like. So from below ground to above ground. Now that's a very, very complex farming system of which tractors are not going to be any use at all. So how could we design for that kind of future system and retool for it, given the new tools that we have? So that's very much the ongoing and massive, overwhelming job, I think, of design with agriculture. And we can't do that yet because we don't have the tools, but we do have the hands. So this is all of us working in a very steep agricultural environment, trying to sort of form it into that food forest. When it comes then to what people do on the land, managing time, managing the legacy of what somebody did exactly in a single place and how that soil might respond is a big task. So translating that data into action, into knowledge that others could then reuse is part of that task. And I'm just jumping a little bit to one of those projects, which is RUMMI, Robotics for Microfarms, which I'll show in a moment, is about time stamping and geolocating actions, and then being able to transfer that information. So there's a dashboard that we use to be able to log what's happening in the garden. So this really sort of begins this idea of computational agroecology. So doesn't mean that there's no humans, doesn't mean that it's automated, but it does mean that data is turned into information and potentially can be used wisely. And I see this idea of if we reinvent the farm rather than reinvent the tractor, right, then we might be able to come up with some new tools and new ways to work. I'll come back to that as well. But if we go way back, then it would be taking from forage to farm and back. So what would it mean if we could actually become foragers again? What would a farm look like in that sense? So at Vaidauda, we won a European project. Actually, I closed Vaidauda. I locked the door and I was like, okay, this is too much. And I went off into the Pyrenees and I said, no more, it's too much. And then we won this European project. And so I came back and we started this project and off we went again. So this was a European funded project with only 6 partners led by Sony Computer Science Laboratory in Paris. And essentially it was about how to tool for complex small-scale farms. So small-scale farms, a micro farm is a European designation of a farm that's smaller than 5 hectares. And on those farms, inevitably, they have a polyculture. They have multiple different crops. They have mixed agriculture. They have animals on there. And they do that because they can't compete with the economy of scale with big farms, which have a single crop or only a few crops a year. So small-scale agriculture is very, very interesting for dealing with complex planting. And also the tools that are used on these farms haven't changed pretty much since the Middle Ages, which is fascinating and a big challenge, but also very interesting for potential sustainable modes of agriculture into the future. So that farm that you see in the kind of idyllic view, painted view, is actually a real farm in France. And these are some interesting books that I reference on that topic. So I'll just throw those in. But what might this be for urban agriculture? What would it mean to have micro plots which are productive? So within rural environments, micro farms, there's many, but they are insignificant in their relationship to the massive scale farms. But in urban agriculture, this is relevant. So what you're seeing here again is polyculture cropping strategies, still in rows on top of a building. I think we can go beyond that even. But a micro farm would produce, let's say, 80 different crop varieties, which I think is significant for a market garden, whether it's close to a town or within a city. Again, just some other references. Carolyn Steele is a great author writing about the relationship between rural and city. Of course, you can't have a city without food. So a city determines agricultural practice as much as the rural practice determines itself. But one is related to the other and they are inseparable. And so this is that idea of cytopia, of living in a food producing place, which also includes cities. Another is sea poles, which is from André Bellion and Katharina Bonn, who were my teachers at Brighton University some decades back. And they have this idea of a continuous productive urban landscape. Very much idea about corridors and having planting strategies which have a network effect across cities. So this is about weaving the rural and the urban environment together. All of ROMI as a project is online, is open source. So we were building open source robotics, which anyone could customize and adapt to local contexts. And it was based essentially on a market study, or European-wide, every country that maps online. So you could see the number of farms, micro farms within each country, their revenues, what they were doing successfully or not. And there's more than 50% of farms are micro farms, but the land cover is tiny. So they're kind of insignificant in that way. But what are the problems for micro farms? This is what the European Commission was set, is giving up. So the idea was to support farmers, particularly young farmers who want to come into this polyculture context and begin to work. And what the evidence, the research was showing is after 4 years of hard work, they would give up. And they would give up because not so much of not being successful in their planting strategies, but giving up because they weren't getting the economic benefits and they had lack of time. So constant work. And also if you have a look at the position of this farmer's body, that's very manual. And so they'd give up also because of musculoskeletal problems. So how do we encourage young farmers to keep going in this context? Was the question set by the European Commission. I quite like working in these farms, but nonetheless, that was the question set. Again, you can see some of these tooling. These are very manual tools, often that they haven't changed for centuries. Or apart from the greenhouse that you can see there, but often very, very manual. Okay, so let's do that thing about robotics, right? So, what is a robot? It automates manual work. And you can see there is a six-axis robot on the side. These are robots that we use in Vidalda, in Fab Labs, and they can pretty much do anything and more that a hand can do. If we take a six-axis robot and we put it into conventional agricultural contexts, it doesn't make sense, because those agricultural contexts are designed to be simple. So one crop en masse with a very simple machine that does one job. That's what we've been doing since the Industrial Revolution, or in a sense, since we started to use donkeys and horses and plowing. But if you've got a robot that could do anything, why would you want it to do one thing? So a lot of the tooling that we're seeing around conventional agriculture is the automation of something very, very simple. So I would suggest, let's use those new tools to do something complex rather than to do something simple. So that means reinvent the farm rather than reinvent the robot. Use something to do something complex. So there's a match there between computation and complexity. So I'm just going to run quite fast, I think, now through some of these tools and projects. So this is a system that we worked with Romy. So essentially, you don't scan plants and then label them to do computer vision. You grow a virtual model of the plant, and then you create noise and adaptation. So you do a synthetic labeling. So this means, particularly for some of the researchers in France, that they were looking at the phenotype of different types of species, trying to relate that to the genotype, as in the genome, the genetic code, and seeing how you could then train a computer model based on virtual plant models. Again, this is all open source, so it means that you don't have to label every plant or every disease on a plant or every behavior of an insect on a plant. You create the virtual models of them and then relate that into real life. So this is creating synthetic data sets which can then train on real world scenarios. It makes things faster to train a computer algorithm, basically. We began to make three types of, there's actually four types of tool here. So you've got a rover that works along the ground. We have a scanning robot which can move at high frequency over a single plot. You can see up there in the back there's a drone. We also created, I'll move a bit faster here, I think. We also created, there's the scanning bot. Let me see if I can get it. Okay, this. So this is a phenotyping scanner that is working in biology labs to essentially understand the growth of a plant as it moves, as it develops. And so this is a model species which is Arabidopsis. Many biologists, botanists all over the world spend a lot of time measuring the angles of leaves and organs on the plant. They literally do that with protractors and measuring tapes, which is fine, but that's a lot of time. So we created this phenotyping scanner, which essentially extracts information about the growth of the plant, all of the angles of the leaves through the phyllotaxy, where they come out. So that's interesting for them to look at that in relation to anything known about the genome of the plant. This is also software working with else systems. So this is a way to virtually grow plants. You can also play with that as well. Everything open source here. So this would be creating a virtual model and then applying that back to real world scenarios. So you could do this not only in a lab, but you could then take that out into the field and scan in a garden, right? Okay, so this is not for John Deere style. Again, this is for very small scale farms. So what does that mean if you've got a phenotyping scanner, which is only €1,000 to build? What can you do with that? These are the questions that are raised when we sort of release these technologies. These are just some other scans that we've done, working with software which is open and online. So looking at NDVI indexes for plant health in relationship to the topography of the land. Those scans are done by drones, quite common now, in fact. And then this is part of the rover. So essentially it's as simple as a CNC machine on wheels, and very, very cheap to build. But what it can do is identify different crops and work around them. So if we bring back mechanization into a farm, that reduces the need for herbicides, pesticides, potentially fungicides, if we can work well enough. But mechanics basically means less need for chemicals as a way of controlling an environment. So that's a kind of net positive in some ways. It doesn't necessarily mean automation, but yes, this is automated weeding. So this is weeding around crops, identifying where they are, and tracking them. But that's also that's a lot of information there as well. So who's growing where can give you indications of soil health, about the climate health, about water content, moisture content, compaction of the soil as well. So this is not just weeding, it's picking up information, which is relevant. This is testing on a farm in France. And that's just one of the mechanical devices, is just a little scratcher that goes through the topsoil. But you could put anything on there. You could put a camera on there. You could do many, many different things with this device. But what it can do is get very close to the soil and even get underneath leaves if you wanted it to. So I'm just going to come back to why this is potentially interesting for tradition. And what you're seeing here is a labeling set which looks at weeds and carrots. So on a local farm that I have to me, it's a big organic farm, they don't produce carrots. And the reason for that is an economic one and a spatial one. That when you plant carrots, you plant them generally in lines. And then you have to weed between the lines using a tractor or a mechanical tool. But if you go back to the traditional method of this, what farmers used to do prior to the Industrial Revolution is take a handful of seed and broadcast that seed. They just throw it out there. So those seeds would germinate wherever they wanted or wherever they landed. And then what the farmer would have to do is separate. If there's 2 carrot seedlings coming up too close, they do this process called bearding, which they'd remove one of them. Don't know if you've ever seen those carrots that hug each other and wrap around each other. So that process of selecting one from that stops that wrapping. But of course, then you water the whole ground. You water it, so the weeds come up at the same time as the carrots germinate. So then you have to come back again and weed between the carrots. So broadcasting makes economic and spatial sense for the farmer, but that's too much work to weed and to beard between them. So what would it be if a robot did it? Yep, okay, basically it means we can identify weeds, we can identify carrots that are too close together, and we can take them out, which means that a farmer, my farmer close to me, would grow carrots again. Okay, so that's learning from a traditional practice and potentially taking that into a future practice. It's just an example, really. All of this, just to know, is online. So you could have a download of all of these things. There's videos and topic reports that explain these things. And all of the information, designs, is all open, as it should be in a European project. Philip, how am I doing for time?
Yeah, maybe 5 more minutes, so then we have 15 minutes for conversation, if that's fine.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to do this one rapidly. Okay, sorry for so many slides. So this is where I am now in Terres de Ebre, and this is the southern part of Catalonia. And I'm right in that middle of that map. On the left, it's a biosphere. There's a lot of terraces here. There's a lot of different types of agriculture, rice farming in the Delta region next to the sea as well. And so this is where I am. This is where I'm calling from now. So this is another, let's say, site of investigation for me. But what can we do with these terraces? So very difficult to get tractors up onto these terraces. There's olives, almonds, carobs, and a lot of abandoned land. Huge fire risks as well. Rural shrinkage, farmers leaving the region. So the question in this sense is, how can we encourage young people to come back, potentially through agroforestry? Maybe they have an interest in biology more than the manual labor of building walls. But this is another context of change. So it's a beautiful site, but right next to the river, but a lot of abandonment. So that's a kind of social, cultural, agricultural, utopian vision, which would be, how could we replant and refarm these farms, given that we potentially have new tools. Okay, I think I'm not going to go into that one, but a lot of mapping happening around here, identifying which species want to grow where, which types of crops and trees might form fire barriers, or how can we work with the understory, improve soils. So there's a lot of mapping and working with local agricultural universities to try and figure that out. Some more tools to do with LiDAR scanning. So this is quite interesting in terms of working out the biomass of a forest. If we can use LiDAR and we can scan trees, then what do you get? You get an understanding of carbon capture. You get an understanding of individual crops growing in different areas, but a complete understanding of biomass. So there's something that can be worked with there. Okay, and I'm going to do this in 2 minutes, which is another project, open source beehives. I know many of us had an interest in bees, so I threw this in. So this is a project that looks at kind of biodynamic form of beekeeping where you don't control the movement of the queen. You don't force the bees to build in a kind of framework. You allow them to do what they want to do. And it's based on a design of a French, it's a lot of French here, a French monk a century ago or over, who designed the people's hive, called a Ware hive. And that is working with a top bar method. This is also a hive that uses top bars, so no frames. That makes things difficult for the beekeeper because the bees tend to do what they want to do rather than what the beekeeper wants them to do. This is a natural form of beekeeping. So redesigning those hives to be cut with a CNC machine, which means that you could send the files anywhere and anyone could be able to build one of those in a fab lab. So this is the open source CNC IKEA style beehive based on Abbé Ware's design. This is us playing around with it in the fab lab. And you can see some of these formations that the bees make when you leave them to do what they want to do. Designing for open source, I would say, is more about communicating how to use the files, how to make it yourself, and allowing the files to be in formats which anyone could use with any different software. So publicizing the how-to manuals and the documentation is I would say, more important than just putting a license on it. So creating a kind of community who can answer the questions amongst themselves is the job of open source in this way. And so this project was about designing, testing it, sharing the knowledge, trying it out, failing, trying again, and then listening to the bees, listening to and watching the reaction of the bees. So that is the driving concept here, is what do bees want rather than how can we make them work. So again, it's the same concept, is make things complex for yourself as a farmer or an apiculture practitioner, and then start designing. So let it go back to the baseline and then start designing. So these are just some images of working with the hives there. And one of the big issues that we had that beehive makers have is this propolization, where bees begin to glue things together because they want to adapt the hive. So where they propolize and where they put their wax and the propolis matters to the function of the hive. So looking at those things were part of a way for us to understand. And then we had sensors as well, so acoustic sensors, listening to the general buzz in the hive. And we used some techniques to be able to try and understand colony health and also try to predict when a colony might swarm. So you can do that by looking at the signatures coming from the sound of the hive. So the bees stop feeding the queen 3 days before they swarm, and we can pick that signature up. So that means that we can predict basically when they're going to swarm. Many, many other signatures that we pick up, but we have no clue what they are. We know there's something going on there, but we can't observe at the same time. So we don't know what those signatures are. Okay, I'm going to finish there, and I'm just interested to hear any thoughts or feedback on all of that. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Jonathan, for this really extensive tour through your experience in very different contexts. Of course, I have a lot of comments and questions, but I want to open the floor to the other ones that maybe see it for the first time or just got to know Jonathan. So maybe any comments? We get bee experts by now, so this is 2.5 project around bees. So yeah, Carla, you're the first one.
Hi, Jonathan. First of all, thank you so much for your very interesting presentation. I would like to ask you regarding a lot of data that you show, which aspects of these systems do you think remain difficult or even impossible to fully capture through data?
I think that's a really on-topic question. So I don't think that data is information. Data is just whatever a sensor could record. But what we make sense of the data to be is our choice of what essentially we're analyzing for. So data is not information until we make it information. And information also is not wisdom. So data's just an observation. I don't think that we can run the world through data at all. And we're limited to what we observe. Having said that, though, when you have a microphone attached to a beehive, that means that we can listen constantly. And so with that constant flow of information, we can begin to see new patterns. And then we have other types of sensors, multispectral cameras, or cameras positions through satellites, or different types of chemical analysis, or genetic metagenomic analysis coming from soils. So we get to see more. We have a higher bandwidth of observation. But again, that doesn't mean anything unless we can make sense of it. So I think data is only about increased bandwidth, but it's not about information.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan.
That refers to the famous continuum of understanding: data, information, knowledge, wisdom. A big topic, and also a big sort of variety in the cultural understanding of what means. But Jan, you were sort of raising your hand as well.
Jonathan, really fascinating work, actually. I was really mesmerized. I have a big question which goes back to what you said initially around self-sufficiency. Recent geopolitical events have made us feel how painfully dependent we actually are on states that we'd rather not be dependent on. To what extent do you think there's a risk that some of the technology, and I know a lot of your software is open source, but that some of the technology that's becoming more commonplace in securing our food system is making us incredibly dependent on potential hostile nations and geopolitical players that could compromise our very existence?
Yeah, I think that, this is again a profoundly interesting topic and a take, I think, on this. It is the question of, is technology dangerous? So it's Pandora's box in that sense, which is an ongoing question. I can only answer in the sense that I think an abundance of difference beats a singular result, right? So if we are dependent on a singular technology or a singular industry, then yeah, we're tied to it, we're trapped. But going the other way into an open source kind of format means that we can try things that can work locally. So not every farm is the same, and nor should it be the same. And let's just think about this in terms of a beehive, perhaps. A beehive in Tunisia generally has to keep cool, whereas a beehive in Alaska has the problem of keeping warm and bears attacking it. So being able to respond to local needs and empowering through knowledge, I think is what I'm interested in doing. I mean, this is a debate also around open source. So if you open source genetic information to everybody, somebody's going to do something bad with it, for sure. If you open source robotics to everybody, which you can, then somebody's going to do something bad with it. But I would hope that if we have access and wisdom to do things in response to our local environment, then we might be able to reverse some of the existing changes that we already live within, like the threats that we already live within. So we're all addicted to oil. How can we not do that? So we're already living in a dystopian monopoly of technology, but we might be able to diffuse it. But yeah, I take your question. I think is a really, really important question. Yeah.
Maybe also to build on your question, Jan, I mean, I think your contexts are very different. You're coming from London. And of course, it's very clear that the projects that you're running are not aiming at feeding the people there locally. It has a very strong social dimension and, let's say, a didactic dimension maybe in an educational way in terms of food literacy, biodiversity literacy, whereas in the context you're working right now, Jonathan, it's quite different. So I would be interested in the social dimension as well, because I know that even in Benin Fallet, you're on the one hand getting students up there, but you also were curating in this, I would call it a little village. How many inhabitants is Benin Fallet? Maybe 2,000. You just had an exhibition there. I'm really curious about how we can engage people, as the title of your lecture was also the ecological indicators as drivers for design change or designing change. And we're talking about what I cannot agree more about, translating data into actions, and action in the end is a social thing. And very often we are confronted with, I mean, in Cologne as well, we have a little plot of 2,000 square meter, and of course this doesn't feed any family. When I was in Taipei and I was visiting this very impressive garden in this old football stadium, basically each family has a little box and come there every Saturday. This is nice and entertaining and might change your way. And you think about food and you are sort of preparing food and maybe you buy different food and thus have an influence. So again, this brings me back to the question of the social dimension on the one hand and the leverage point that we can achieve with this really small scale things that we're working on. Even if, Jan, I think I was very impressed when you showed that you had 6,000 volunteers in one of the projects that you were showing. So maybe you can comment on that, because this could be really a common ground for the activities that we're working on.
Shall I respond to that?
Yeah, maybe that would be, I mean, because you're in a very tough situation right now in Benin Fallet in getting people there. On the other hand, I see a lot of universities also seeking those sort of rural places to have a very specific expertise, and then maybe bringing it back, what could work with Valdaura Labs or with a Barcelona context.
I mean, the context, the social, cultural context of the village, there's 700 people in the village. There used to be more than that, 2,500, I think. and people working in the land, working on the land of the comarque of Benefayet. So you have to sort of, the way I understand this is the village is almost like a living factory in which the people go out to work and then they come back to the village. So everyone's working towards that, or used to work towards that aim. So a lot of the infrastructure is built around that. So everyone used to have a family house in the village and then a kind of farm facility where I'm currently living. The population has decreased. This is rural shrinkage. So farmers here are generally in their late 50s, and there are no young farmers. There are none. So if you go to a cooperative meeting, that's what you see. You see a decreasing number of farmers who are just doing it because they know how to do it. But when they retire, that's it. The land becomes abandoned. So what to do in the face of that is a really big social, cultural question. And of course, then when I turn up there and say I'm going to bring international students from India, China, the US, France, into the village, they are shocked. They're saying, what do you think that you can achieve with that? But the students are absolutely fascinated, and they're thinking, and they find the place to be really a very, very important place to be, and they want to engage with this. So I think that tying the younger generation through new ideas to these cultural contexts is relevant. How to do that? It can be volunteered, but I think that also the work needs to be done. There's this productive area. So a lot of thought about cottage industries and remaking these farms is relevant. But the response from the farmers and the community is a happy one. It's a positive one because they want to see something happen rather than abandonment and moving away. So they're happy to try new things, essentially, and have some fresh perspectives. It's got to that point, let's say. But in terms of volunteering, people love it. People love working on the land. They like working outside, being together, working together. And being a part-time farmer, I think, is a potential future here. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a big problem. It's a huge issue.
Yeah, I think both volunteering and part-time refers to time, and maybe let's call it longevity and maybe the horizon of the younger people, let's call it like that. And when I was invited by Aguinaldo to come to Curitiba a while ago for a workshop, they also had a problem that they have around 170 community gardens, but they are only the elderly are taken care for, because the younger ones are either not interested, or they don't have the time, or they have a different notion of time. Well, okay, I engage, but the results needs to be there tomorrow or the other day after tomorrow. What I see with my students as well, if I'm working with them and nothing visible happens in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, then they tend to lose interest a bit. But I mean, the whole permaculture thing is, you don't. I like this image that you've shown with the different levels of the food forest with the hugels. You don't buy the trees in that size. It's a process that takes years. And how do you engage the people to contribute to something where they might not see the benefits during their engagement? This type of contribution, what maybe is an attitude mindset. I don't know if any of you can comment on that. from your experience, but I see this in different cultures in the design education sector, especially, that I can talk about.
Actually, I would like to make a comment.
Yeah.
Can you hear me well?
Yes, Dan, that works well.
Yeah. I have been noticed in the past few years that there are also younger generations. They start to play these farming simulation games, and they start to develop a true interest in in this particular field. And then when they become old enough, actually they are dedicated to work in the farm, as a younger generation. So that could be something interesting in the near future. That because all the young generation they're into gaming, and then they do different activities, socializing, virtual interaction with other players or with the non-human actors in the gaming. It's just a small observation in the past, and I'm an outsider of this field, but I don't know. That could be some possibility to get younger generation interested in what's going on and activities related to farming, and then so they're motivated to go to the real physical side.
Yeah, thank you for this observation, Dan. I fully agree. However, I think they are very much interested, but how do you keep that interest up, and how do you translate that into action?
Pause there. You just froze for a second there, Philip.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just repeating. So I fully agree, but I think the issue is not so much how do you make them curious or interested or engaging. It's really more like how do you keep them on track and show this different sort of notion of time that is necessary in the long run. But maybe my last question, and it's a bit related to that, and I see this in many initiatives, the transfer of knowledge and expertise that you're having. I mean, you had this rhythm, this annual rhythm when you were up in Valdaura Labs, because the one generation left in June and the next generation was coming in September, and it was you, but also the visual artifacts that you're creating. Let's call it a data or knowledge base for them, actually, but they started from scratch. And I know from a lot of initiatives that they have the problem of this onboarding phase. And of course, it could be a human, but that human, very often volunteers, then is all the time just working in sort of explaining how things are going and how people can engage. So I think that's also something that many of the things that you've been showing could work quite well as not only as a database, but a framework sort of to create the knowledge. I mean, including the digital twins thing. What are those plants? How do they behave? How do they relate? And also this digital twins thing, I think, is something where we, as we are working with a primary school, for example, could engage the very youngest that we should work with in a curious interaction with a field, let's put it like that, with the plants, with the soil, with biodiversity, just by monitoring it, both through technical sensors, but also through human observations. However, then this sort of knowledge base that we're creating, how can we really make it actionable to sort of, on the one hand, to learn from each other, the different labs, but also to do that on one side with a change of people. There's a comment from Aguinaldo. Perhaps this is a critical issue. How foster patience with the timing of nature? Yes, foster patience. How to reduce the rush to get results on the short term. How to accept the possibility of failure when engaging with nature. Yeah, I mean, in Europe, we have this new green competence framework, and this is, as a matter of fact, something that I'm missing that goes along with that type of engagement. This sort of, this very different notion of time and engagement and longevity in this project. I mean, coming from Cologne, where they started to build the cathedral some 900 years ago, way longer than Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. I always tell my students, look, the guy who started that, he knew he might not even see the very foundation, the very first brick. It's a very long-term planning. And I think this is really one of the learnings that is also a very positive outcome. And this maybe refers also to my comment about, or to Jan's comments also about the self-sufficiency on the one hand, and how this can change the behavior of the people, not only according to food, but really also according to their relation to nature and the possible influence. Aguinaldo.
No, just, I'm starting a project here with one of my research students here on focus on children. Focusing on children. In this case here, how to reduce this rush for short-term results. How to understand. When you go to the indigenous communities, they grow up since they are young, since they are babies. They know about it because they interact all the time with the forest and so on. But in the urban area, where kids don't even see the nature, sometimes they don't even interact. How to change this paradigm so when they become adults, they
Now it's Aguinaldo who's frozen, right?
Yeah.
Aguinaldo, you've been frozen just after you said when they become adults.
sorry. When they become adults, they understand a bit more about these interactions, these interdependencies on real world, and they become better adults. So I don't know in terms, at least in terms of the nature relationship. So perhaps changing the farming there in Catalonia should start with the changing the working for kids. Now in Brazil, although of course I never give up on adults, but I'm becoming a bit skeptical of profound changes on adults. I think maybe just one example. One guy in Curitiba was doing like slow food for kids. So the cooking and so on. So perhaps small farming. I saw that in Rotterdam. In Rotterdam, they have these little farms inside of the urban area. It was a great initiative. So the kids, they collect the eggs there and so on. These little farms inside of the city. In that case, there was I don't know if I never saw this around the world. The first city I saw small farms inside of the city. Maybe just one, that could be one way forward.
Yeah, so I mean, this is why I was stretching on the social dimension as well. I think what is really, really crucial, and we're constantly sort of really readapting. I mean, what is the impact that design can have? And I mean, I think I know quite a few educators from the design context still struggling. Okay, what exactly are you doing once you're doing permaculture like other people? I mean, what is the specific design perspective on that? And I think I get increasingly answers, and I think this is change also is really, really meaningful for me. So once again, thank you, Jonathan, for the lot of inputs and the excellent conversation that we had afterwards. So we have nearly 1.5 hours right now.